Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. 3. The doctor whispered, the color draining from his face as the ultrasound wand slipped in his trembling grip. The single word shattered the heavy silence of the private clinic like a gunshot. Julian, lying on the exam table with his shirt hiked up, felt his breath hitch in his throat, his hands instinctively flying to the curve of his stomach. But the true danger wasn't the medical anomaly on the screen. It was the suffocating pressure of the 3 men standing behind him. 3 distinct, overpowering auras, like thunder, ice, and smoke, clashed in the small room, instantly turning the air toxic with pheromones of shock and sudden, violent possessiveness. Repeat that. Kalen's voice cut through the tension, low and smooth like velvet dragged over broken glass. The head of the Azure faction stepped forward, his silver eyes narrowing on the monitor. T3 heartbeats, Lord Kalen, the doctor stammered, stepping back toward the wall as if hoping to merge with it. It appears the Omega is carrying triplets. A heavy, gloved hand slammed onto the medical cart, scattering instruments. Riker, the enforcer of the Crimson Syndicate, snarled, his pheromones spiking with the scent of burnt wood and gunpowder. Triplets? The deal was for one heir. One heir to unite the syndicates. Which one is it? Which one belongs to who? Silas, the third alpha and the shadowy financier of the Obsidian Ring, stepped out from the corner. He didn't shout. He merely smiled, a terrifying expression that didn't reach his eyes. He leaned over Julian, his long dark hair brushing against the Omega's exposed skin. Yes, doctor. Do tell. The genetic cocktail was supposed to fuse our lineages into a single, perfect vessel. If there are 3, has the mixture separated? Is there one for each of us? Or did one of us overpower the others? Julian closed his eyes, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was just a surrogate, a debt slave sold to settle his father's gambling ruins. He was supposed to be the vessel for peace between 3 warring crime families. Instead, his womb had become the battlefield for a new war. To understand the terror of that moment, one must understand the pact. The city of Oakhaven had been bleeding for decades. The Azure, Crimson, and Obsidian factions had turned the streets into a graveyard. The Elder Council had proposed a solution, a biological truce. A child created using experimental fertility science, a chimera heir, that would possess the DNA of all 3 alpha leaders. It was scientifically risky, morally gray, and politically desperate. Julian had been chosen not for his beauty, though he possessed a delicate, haunting allure with his ash-blonde hair and stubborn chin, but for his genetic resilience. He was a rare, null-compatible Omega, capable of accepting aggressive alpha DNA without his body rejecting the fetus. The night of the insemination was a memory Julian tried to repress. It wasn't violent, but it was coldly clinical, yet humiliatingly intimate. They hadn't used a syringe. The pact required a biological imprinting. Due to the volatility of the synthesized genetic serum, it had to be introduced while the Omega was in a heightened state of arousal, triggered by the pheromones of the donors. He remembered the blindfold. He remembered Kalen's cold commands, Riker's rough hands holding his hips, and Silas's whispered taunts in his ear. They hadn't touched him sexually, not fully, but they had overloaded his senses with their presence while the procedure was conducted. Now, for months later, the science had apparently evolved into a miracle or a curse. We need a paternity test, Riker growled, reaching for Julian's arm. Right now? Invasive. I don't care about the risk. Stop, Julian shouted, slapping Riker's hand away. The room froze. Omegas did not strike alphas. Not in this world. But Julian sat up, pulling his shirt down, his eyes blazing with a fierce protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. You extract amniotic fluid now, you risk a miscarriage. You lose them all. Is that what the Great Enforcer wants? To kill his own heir because he lacks patience? Riker looked ready to snap Julian's neck, his jaw ticking, but Kalen raised a hand. The Omega is right, Kalen said, his voice devoid of emotion, though his scent, a crisp, wintry musk, betrayed his anxiety. The contract states we cannot risk the heir's life. If there are 3, the risk is tripled. We wait. Wait. Silas laughed softly, walking around the bed to stand near Julian's head. 9 months of wondering? We are allies of convenience, Kaylin. If I find out that your sperm cannibalized mine in the womb and all 3 babies are yours, I will burn your district to the ground. And if they are all yours, Silas? Riker challenged, his hand drifting to the holster under his jacket. You think I'll let a snake raise a brood of vipers to rule over me? Enough. Julian's voice cracked. He felt nauseous, the warring pheromones making his head spin. They are inside me. I am the one carrying the weight. If you kill each other now, who protects me? Who protects them? The 3 alphas looked at the Omega. For the first time, they weren't looking at a vessel. They were looking at the leverage. He's right, Silas murmured, his eyes gleaming with calculation. Until the birth, he is the most valuable object in the city. We move him. Not to the clinic, not to any of our individual estates. We move him to the neutral zone. The penthouse. And we all stay there, Kaylin decided, his gaze locking with Julian's terrified eyes. Together. Watching him. Watching each other. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the city, a gilded cage designed for luxury and paranoia. Life in the confinement was a psychological torture unlike any Julian had ever endured. He was no longer a debt slave. He was a queen bee trapped with 3 starving wolves. The dynamic of the house shifted daily, a volatile game of chess where Julian was the king that couldn't be captured. The first month in the penthouse was defined by Riker. The Crimson Enforcer was a man of violence. He didn't know how to be gentle. He paced the living room like a caged tiger, constantly checking the security feeds. He treated Julian with suspicion, watching everything he ate. One evening, a storm raged outside, mirroring Riker's mood. Julian was in the kitchen, struggling to reach a jar of pickles on a high shelf. The cravings were hitting him hard. Riker appeared behind him, his large body radiating heat. He didn't ask. He simply reached over Julian, his chest pressing against Julian's back, and grabbed the jar. He set it on the counter with a thud. You're too small, Riker grunted, not moving away. He had Julian pinned against the counter. How are you going to carry 3 alpha whelps? You'll break. I'm stronger than I look, Julian muttered, refusing to turn around. The proximity was overwhelming. Riker smelled of rain and cedarwood now, a scent that made Julian's knees weak despite his fear. Are you? Riker's hand moved, hesitant for the first time, and hovered over Julian's belly. One of them. Kicked. Yesterday. During the briefing. Julian turned slowly. The massive, scarred man looked confused, almost terrified of the life growing inside the Omega. They react to your voice, Julian admitted softly. It was a lie, or maybe it wasn't. He needed to placate them. Especially when you shout. Riker's eyes widened. They know I'm strong. They know you're loud, Julian corrected. For a second, the tension broke. Riker actually smirked. He leaned down, his face inches from Julian's. If there is a crimson air in there, he will be a warrior. He won't be soft like you. He'll need to be smart, Julian countered, holding the alpha's gaze. Muscles don't stop bullets, Riker. Tactics do. Riker stared at him, a strange glint in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was respect. Eat your pickles, Omega, he grumbled, backing away. But that night, Julian found an extra blanket draped over him on the sofa, and Riker sat guard by the balcony door until dawn. The 5th month belonged to Silas. If Riker was the body, Silas was the poison. The Obsidian leader was manipulative, wealthy, and cultured. He didn't use intimidation. He used seduction. He filled the penthouse with rare flowers, played classical music that soothed Julian's migraines, and bought baby clothes made of silk that cost more than Julian's childhood home. Silas found Julian in the library, reading a book on prenatal care. The alpha slid onto the leather sofa next to him, a glass of wine in his hand, for himself, of course. You look tired, my dear, Silas purred, tucking a stray lock of hair behind Julian's ear. His fingers were cold, his rings sharp. Carrying the future of the underworld is exhausting, Julian replied dryly, not looking up. It must be terrifying, Silas whispered, leaning in. Not knowing which of us to trust. You know, Kaylin would take the child and raise it in a sterile academy. Riker would put a gun in its hand by age 5. And you? Julian asked, finally meeting the dark, serpentine eyes. What would you do, Silas? I would give them the world, Silas smiled. And I would give you the world, too. You see, Julian, I've done the calculations. The probability of the chimera experiment working perfectly is low. It is likely that 2 of the fetuses will absorb the third, or, well, let's just say, nature favors the ruthless. Are you suggesting I should hope for your child to kill the others? Julian asked, revulsion curling in his stomach. I'm suggesting, Silas placed a hand on Julian's knee, squeezing gently, that you should think about your own future. Once those babies are born, you are expendable. Unless you have a champion, an alpha who wants you for more than just an incubator. Julian realized then the danger Silas posed. He wasn't just vying for the heir, he was vying for Julian. Not out of love, but out of possession. To own the Omega was to own the leverage forever. I don't need a champion, Julian said, standing up, though his legs trembled. I am the father of these children. If you think I will let anyone, even you, hurt them or separate them, you have miscalculated the variables. Silas watched him walk away, his smile sharpening. We shall see, little bird. We shall see. The 7th month brought the pain, and with it, Kaelin. Julian's body was struggling. The triplets were growing fast, drawing deeply on his reserves. His ankles were swollen, his back agony. Kaelin, the Azure Lord, was the most distant of the 3. He viewed the pregnancy as a business merger. But one night, Julian collapsed in the hallway. He didn't hit the floor. Kaelin caught him. The intellectual, cold alpha scooped him up effortlessly, carrying him not to the medical bay, but to the master bedroom, Kaelin's room. He laid Julian on the bed and began to massage his cramping legs. No words, just efficient, rhythmic pressure. You should be resting more, Kaelin said, his voice monotone, focused on his task. I can't sleep, Julian gasped as a spasm hit his calf. The pressure. It's too much. Kaelin stopped. He looked at Julian's distended stomach. The skin was stretched tight, the movement of 3 lives visible beneath the surface. For a man who dealt in logic and order, this chaotic biological reality seemed to fascinate and terrify him. We were arrogant, Kaelin admitted quietly. It was the first time an alpha had shown weakness. To think we could force nature to our will. To put you through this. Regret doesn't help me, Kaelin, Julian whispered. No. Logic does. Kaelin stood up and began to unbutton his shirt. Julian froze. What are you doing? Scenting, Kaelin stated as if it were obvious. High stress levels in the Omega produce cortisol, which harms fetal development. Exposure to pure alpha pheromones reduces Omega stress. It is medically recommended. Kaelin took off his shirt, revealing a lean, sculpted torso. He climbed into the bed, lying beside Julian, but not touching him. Come here. Hesitantly, Julian shifted. Kaelin pulled him close, pressing Julian's back against his chest. He flared his scent, cool mint, old parchment, and rain. It was overwhelming, washing over Julian like a tranquilizer. The pain didn't vanish, but the tension in his muscles melted. Sleep, Kaelin commanded softly. Julian closed his eyes. Surrounded by the scent of the most powerful man in the city, he felt strangely safe. Kaelin. If none of them are yours, will you kill them? Kaelin was silent for a long time. His hand moved to rest over Julian's stomach, his large palm encompassing the bump. I don't know, he whispered. I truly don't know. The climax arrived on a Tuesday, disguised as a catering delivery. They were nearing the 8th month. The tension in the penthouse was palpable. The rival factions outside were getting restless, rumors of the triplets leaking out. Julian was in the living room with Silas when the elevator doors pinged. The delivery man stepped out, but instead of a food warmer, he pulled a submachine gun from the cart. Down, Silas screamed, tackling Julian behind the heavy marble kitchen island just as bullets shredded the expensive decor. The glass walls shattered. Chaos erupted. Riker roared from the upper balcony, vaulting over the railing like a demon. He landed amidst the glass, dual pistols blazing. He was a whirlwind of violence, taking 3 shots to the shoulder, but not slowing down. Kaelin emerged from his study, not with a gun, but with a tablet, activating the building's automated defenses. Shields. Sector 4, he barked into his comms. They're breaching the north window. Silas yelled, firing a handgun he had pulled from a hidden holster under the counter. Julian, stay down. Julian curled around his stomach, the noise deafening. He felt the babies thrashing in distress. Asterisk not now. Please not now. Asterisk. An assassin flanked the island, aiming directly at Julian. No, it wasn't one voice. It was three. Riker threw himself in the path of the bullet, taking it in the thigh. Kalen triggered a security shutter that decapitated the assassin's approach. Silas lunged, driving a knife into the man's neck with surgical precision. Silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing and the alarm klaxons. Julian looked up. The three alphas formed a perimeter around him. Riker was bleeding heavily. Silas was covered in gore. Kalen was pale, his hands shaking as he held a detonator. They looked at each other. The rivalry was gone. In that moment, staring at the terrified Omega and the precious cargo he carried, the realization hit them. They weren't three factions anymore. They were a pack. The baby. Julian groaned, clutching his stomach as water soaked his trousers. The babies. They're coming. The birth was not a sterile medical procedure. It was a war zone trioff. Because the security system was in lockdown and the assassins were still swarming the lower levels, no doctor could get in. It was up to them. Riker, despite his bleeding leg, held Julian up, his massive strength supporting the Omega's exhausted frame. Push, Julian. Scream at me if you have to, but push. Kalen, the intellectual, was forced to be the midwife. He had read every book, memorized every diagram. His hands, usually so clean, were stained with fluids. Head is crowning. Julian, breathe. Match my breathing. Silas held Julian's hand, wiping the sweat from his brow, whispering praises, anchoring Julian's mind when the pain threatened to shatter it. I can't. Julian sobbed. You can, Silas hissed fiercely. You tamed 3 monsters. You can bring 3 lives into this world. Do it for them. The first cry pierced the air. It's a boy, Kalen announced, his voice cracking. He wrapped the infant in a silk shirt Silas had thrown him. Black hair. Pale eyes. Minutes later, a second cry. Another boy, Kalen gasped. Blonde. Like Julian. The third birth was the hardest. Julian was fading. Riker was growling encouragement, pouring his own strength into the Omega through their bond. When the final cry came, it was softer. A girl, Kalen whispered. Red hair. Like Riker's mother. Silence settled over the bloody, wrecked room. Julian lay back against Riker's chest, barely conscious. Kalen and Silas cleaned the infants as best they could. They brought them to Julian. 3 tiny, squalling miracles. Riker looked at the girl with the red fuzz. He touched her cheek with a bloodied finger, tears streaming down his scarred face. Silas looked at the boy with the black hair, his hair. Kalen held the blonde boy, who had Kalen's distinct nose shape. The genetics had split. The impossible had happened. One for each. Or perhaps a mix of all. We need the test, Kalen said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. No, Riker rumbled, tightening his hold on Julian and the girl. No tests. Silas looked up, his eyes soft for the first time. If we test, we separate them. We divide the assets. They aren't assets, Julian whispered, his voice raspy. He looked at the 3 powerful men, brought to their knees by 3 tiny heartbeats. They are brothers and sister. And you. He looked at the alphas. You are the fathers. All of you. Kalen looked at Riker. Riker looked at Silas. Decades of hatred, of blood feuds, of turf wars. It all seemed insignificant compared to the weight of the life in their arms. A triad, Kalen said, testing the word. Not a treaty. A family. God help the world, Silas chuckled wetly, kissing Julian's forehead. 3 heirs. 3 alphas. And 1 Omega to rule us all. Julian smiled weakly as he drifted into sleep. He hadn't just survived the wolves. He had made them his pack. And that is how the Omega turned a war for succession into a dynasty of 4. If you enjoyed seeing how Julian brought these powerful alphas to their knees, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, in Julian's position, would you have forced the paternity test or kept the secret to ensure your survival? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,